welcome to this final presentation of the UK-Japan Young Scientist Workshop 2021, online for the very first time after 20 years of doing these things in the flesh. And it's been quite a challenge, and we thank, and we'll thank again, particularly the team here who've made it, put so much work into making the technology possible. Toshio Nomura, Mary Grace Browning, and Ian Price. And the week seems just to have flown by. Absolutely. The week has absolutely flown by. And I think it's amazing what can be achieved in just a very few days, a very short contact time. Anyway, I won't waffle on, but it really, I repeat how amazing it is to have people from universities and schools in Japan and in Great Britain, and Oriel is currently in Germany, all taking part in this workshop and in this session. First of all, let me thank, in particular, the Great Britain Sasakawa Foundation for their support. They've been supporting us for quite a while, and we're really grateful. And Mitsubishi Electric Europe, and they've equally been supporting us for quite a few years. Kyoto University of Education, who have been supporting our Japanese friends financially, which is very kind of them. The Japan Women's Association in Great Britain, who, although they have little resource, are very strong supporters, and we're very grateful for their donation. And on this occasion, Barclays, who, although haven't given us money, they've been helping to train some of the Japanese people before they arrive at the workshop. I was going to say before they arrive in Britain, but in fact, they're still in Japan, but before they arrive at the workshop. So we're immensely grateful. We're intending, hopefully, to go forward with the workshop again in the flesh next year, but that depends on getting funding and so on. And again, we'll talk about that later. So my duty now, or privilege, to hand over to the student teams for their presentations and questions. And please don't be inhibited about asking questions. The only inhibition is time. They are looking forward to your questions. And who better to chair this session but Ryo Mizuta, who has just finished his doctorate in engineering in Cambridge, and has been involved with us for a very long while. So over to you, Ryo.
Okay, thank you very much, Eric, for the introduction. And it's my pleasure to be chairing this session of talks to this morning. I know the students have been working really hard towards this final day, so I think we can expect a fantastic range of talks. Just a couple of housekeeping points I'd like to make. The first is to students, teachers, distinguished visitors, guests, please ask lots of questions. If you do wish to ask a question, I ask that you either use the Zoom's raise hand function so that I can see that you are raising a hand. I can't necessarily see a physical raising of the hand because we have 98 participants today, or you can type your question in the chat and I'll read it out for you. For the presenting students, please remember you only have 20 minutes and I will be strict on the time. So I will give you a 15-minute warning in the chat. So I'll type 15 minutes. So keep an eye out for that. And then if you continue to go, I will probably have to stop you at 17 minutes-ish, thereabouts, to give enough time for questions. Okay.
So the questions are within that 20 minutes, aren't they?
Yeah, we need to fit everything in that 20 minutes. I'm just going to say that quickly in the Japanese bit. So, ようこそ今日のトークセッションへ。各グループが発表を得たら質疑応答の時間がありますが、もちろん他の生徒の皆様、先生方、他にいらしている皆質問をたくさんお願いします。 で、質問する際なんですけど、Zoom が合わせている挙手機能で合図してください。または、チャットに質問を打っていただければ、こちらから読み上げます。でもしうまく英語で質問が言えないという方は、日本語でも構いません。こちら私ができる限り通訳します。で、発表される生徒さんたちなんですけど、制限時間20分です。これは結構厳しくキープさせてもらいます。で、15分経過した時点でチャットで合図しますので、それにはちゃんとチェックしておいてください。で、そのまま続くようでしたら17分目ぐらいで、強制ストップかけます。ちゃんと質問に時間が残るようにしたいので。Okay, so with that said, I'd like to hop into the first set of talks. So first we have Project One, presenting on Chicxulub, a planetary catastrophe and what we can learn from it. And they are supervised by Dr. Oriel Ray and Simon Crowhurst from the Earth Sciences Department in Cambridge. So if they would like to share their screen and get started when they're ready. So just quickly, for people who are not presenting, if you could mute yourselves, that would be much appreciated. Thank you.
Hello, and welcome to our presentation on Chicxulub, a planetary catastrophe.
Just before we start, we'd like to thank Dr. Oriel Ray, Simon Crowhurst, and Rio Mizuta for all their help this week. So, 66 million years ago, an asteroid impact occurred which caused geographic catastrophes, including the extinction of the dinosaurs. This event saw the end of the Cretaceous period, which made approximately 75% of the species on Earth extinct. In this investigation, we explore the relationships between natural disasters, climatically active gases, and the mass extinction events we saw at the end of the Cretaceous using geological techniques. These can be applied to current threats we face today, such as global warming, where gases are being produced by anthropogenic or man-made sources, which we do have the power to prevent. This investigation is therefore important as it not only enables us to make further discoveries regarding Earth's history, but can be seen as informing us of the consequences of possible future planetary catastrophes.
約6600万年前、地球に隕石が落下して大損害をもたらし、恐竜を絶滅させました。そしてこの出来事は白亜紀の終わりを記し、地球上の約 75% の生物を絶滅に追い込みました。この調査から私たちは自然災害、気候的活性ガス、大量絶滅の出来事の関連性を探りました。これらは今日の私たちが抱える地球温暖化などの解決することができる危機の多くに適用することができます。よってこの調査は地球の歴史についてより深い発見につながるとともに、未来に起こりうる地球規模の災害がもたらす被害の警告ともなります。
Our aim was to look at the effects of major impact events on Earth through experimentation and computational modeling. We focused on the asteroid that caused the Chicxulub crater in modern-day Mexico, more commonly known as the asteroid that wiped out the dinosaurs. To do this, we modeled an impact using mayonnaise and a marble. We used online tools to see what affects crater formation, used Python, a computer programming language, to model the specific Chicxulub event, and investigated methods for geological sampling. In this presentation, we will go over each of these steps, saying what we discovered.
この調査の目的は、地球に起きた大きな出来事による影響を実験やコンピューターでシミュレーションをして調べることです。これにおいて、私たちは今日のメキシコにあるチクシュルブクレーター、つまり恐竜を絶滅に追い込んだクレーターの隕石に着目しました。コンピューターシミュレーションをするために、私たちはマヨネーズとビー玉を使った実験や、クレーターが生じる要因をインターネット上のツールを用いて調べたり、Python というコンピューターのプログラミングツールを用いてチクシュルーブクレーターのモデルを再現したりなどしました。このプレゼンでは私たちが行ったこれらの実験をより詳しく説明し、そこでどのような発見をしたのか発表したいと思います。
So on the first day, we did an experiment using mayonnaise and marbles to model the effects that asteroids can have on the Earth, specifically in forming craters with different depths, diameters, shapes, and rims.
To this experiment, we added about the 3 centimeter depth of mayonnaise acting at the surface of the earth to put and drop the marble, which acted at the asteroid, into it. We then measured the diameter of the craters from when the marble was dropped from the different heights and angles. Using the measured heights and the masses of the marbles, we calculated the kinetic energy just before the impact. We compare each marble's kinetic energy to the diameter of the craters they formed.
But with the many marbles that were dropped, some didn't produce a good rim around the crater or hold their shape properly. So to combat this, we tried the experiment using sand, flour, and cocoa powder instead of mayonnaise, and we found that this works better. Overall, we found that the craters formed were simple, as the marbles weren't big enough and didn't travel fast enough to form complex craters.
On the second day, we learned about the crater asteroid impact cause on Earth and other planets in the solar system. 119 craters have been found in the world. There are variations among countries depending on the progress of research. There are two main types of crater, simple and complex. Simple craters are ball-shaped holes in the ground formed by relatively small impacts. Complex craters are formed by larger impacts where the rim of the crater collapses inwards, which in turn forces rock from the floor up, resulting in a shallower but wider crater with raised central peak or ring.
To discover how craters vary based on the conditions of the impact, we began to experiment using an online calculator called the Earth Impact Effects Program, the interface shown here, that allowed us to control many different variables and then output data on the dimensions of the final craters. This gave us the ability to collect data on asteroid impacts that we otherwise couldn't collect ourselves, including being able to analyze complex craters. The UK students began analyzing how the size and velocity of an asteroid will affect the dimensions of craters formed, finding that the size of the crater scales logarithmically with the kinetic energy of the impactor. Meanwhile, the Japanese students were analyzing how angle and target material of an asteroid would affect the crater, finding that a crater gets bigger the larger the angle, and that sedimentary rock would form larger craters than crystalline rock.
On day 3, we explored the end of the Cretaceous period and how we know what caused this mass extinction. Iridium is very rare on Earth's surface, with only 1 part per billion found. At the KPG boundary, a band of rock marking the end of the Cretaceous period, scientists discovered an enrichment in iridium. With 12 parts per billion, this anomaly made it clear that the KPG mass extinction had an extraterrestrial cause, as asteroids have a similar composition to the early Earth. Sites closer to the impact site have thicker layers of KPG boundary event deposit, leading to the discovery of the Chicxulub crater in Mexico.
We looked at the impact this asteroid caused, focusing on the production of climatically active gases, which are produced when rocks are vaporized by the pressure of the impact. The question we had to answer was how much mass of CO2 and SO2 was produced from the impact. To answer this, we used a series of Python code to calculate the mass of the gases. KPG 層とは先ほど述べた白亜紀最後の大量絶滅である恐竜が絶滅した時の境目の層です。
This is a result. Look at these two graphs. Both the crater experiment and the Earth impact event calculator show a similar upward trend between crater size and kinetic energy. It shows that the greater the energy created by a collision object, the greater the size of the crater. The crater experiment graph shows three distinct groups, which could be concluded to be the three different impact materials used in the experiment.
On day 3, using the Python code, we found out the amount of CO2 formed by the impact event was the same as 11 years of CO2 released today by anthropogenic sources. Also, the impact formed 3.03 times 10 to the 14 kilograms of sulfur dioxide. In 1883, Krakatoa erupted a volcano, dispersing 1.8 times 10 to the 10 kilograms of sulfur dioxide. This is 15,000 times less than the Chicxulub crater event. However, at the time, the volcano caused a 5-year drop of temperatures by 1.2 degrees. It is estimated that temperatures dropped by as much as 26 degrees Celsius in the asteroid event, and these dramatic effects lasted for 3 years. On the right, you can see pick plots showing an impact of the Chicxulub crater. The top one shows the impact at 0 seconds. The next one is 30, then 100, then 200 seconds. If you were to rotate the pick plot around the y-axis, it would form a crater. The impact was equivalent to 206 million megatons of TNT and had a visible fireball radius of 185 kilometers.
So, using the methods described throughout this presentation, we were able to discover what happened in this event that drastically changed Earth's history and even allowed for the age of mammals. The mass of CO2 and SO2 were extremely high, but they do give an indication of the potential consequences of the way we're heading with global warming. Conversely, we discovered that about 30,000 years after the event, the normal ecosystem began to return to the impact site. This is therefore also a testament to the strength of the biosphere and its ecosystems.
これまで説明したさまざまな方法を通して、私たちは地球の歴史を大きく覆し、哺乳類の時代をもたらした出来事について知ることができました。隕石落下による二酸化炭素と二酸化硫黄の排出量は非常に高く、これは今日の私たちが向かっている地球温暖化の時代の影響を示しているのではないかと私たちは考えました。また逆に、隕石落下が起こった約3万年後、隕石が落下した地点で生態系がまた復活したことが分かりました。つまり、生物圏、生態系は大きな存続の力を持つことも分かったのです。
When studying craters, we mainly looked at the impacts of velocity, impact of size, and angular projection. It would be good to experiment with other variables such as rock type and porosity. Furthermore, the research into the KPG boundary layer is still ongoing. With further investigations, there could be new findings, and it would be interesting to see what is discovered in the future.
クレーターを調べるにあたって、私たちは主に落下の速度や角度、隕石の大きさなどに着目して研究を進めました。隕石以外の物質について同じように調べるのもまた良いかもしれません。そしてさらに、筑紫類以外の他の隕石落下地点の調査もまだ進んでいる途中です。さらに調査が進めば、新しい発見などもあるでしょう。どのような新発見がなされるのかは、これからの将来を担う私たちにかかっているのではないでしょうか。Thank you all for listening to our presentation. これで発表終わります。ご清聴ありがとうございました。
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Project One. That was a really impressive talk. We have lots and lots of time because they stuck to time. So we open the floor to questions. Eric.
The title, I think, was, and what we can learn from it. What can we learn from it in terms of present day situation?
I think the most applicable present day situation we're in is sort of this sense that there might be a planetary catastrophe in the near future, and maybe not caused by an extraterrestrial impact, but potentially by things like climate change. And so we looked quite a lot at these climatically active gases, and the scales aren't don't completely match up with what we are seeing today. They are very extreme because obviously it's such a huge event in Earth's history. But I think generally it still acts as a warning for the effects that can happen because 75% of the Earth's species were rendered extinct in this event. So
you had a lot of sulfur dioxide and carbon dioxide and particulate material. What effects do they have individually?
So carbon dioxide acts as I think we all know, a warming agent. So it traps radiation when it's trying to go back into space and keeps heat in Earth. Sulfur dioxide, on the other hand, acts as a cooling agent because it sort of acts like a layer of dust in the atmosphere and prevents sunlight from actually reaching the Earth's surface. So in the Chicxulub event, sulfur dioxide was much more serious, and so the Earth as a whole actually cooled down. But the temperature change was still deviating from what was stable, and in that respect, it caused a global disaster.
Thank you.
Great. We have more questions coming. I think Dylan had his hand raised. Dylan, would you like to ask?
Yes, I was going to ask what the sort of biggest practical problems you ran into were.
Maybe we could ask a Japanese student from the team to comment here. チームの中で日本の生徒、誰か答えてみたらいかがでしょうか。Nobody? How about I ask someone? Could I ask Wakana さん、星さん、日本語でも構いませんので、一つ難しかった点。
難しかった点、実験。
何でも構いません。
ですか？
何でもいいです。
日本語でいいですか？
はい、どうぞ。
マヨネーズを使った実験で、実際に起こる規模の大きいものではなくて、小さい規模で再現した実験を行ったんですけど、そのデータと、実際の大きい規模でのデータを比べるときの、比べるときにあまりにもスケールが違うので、そこをどのデータを使ってとか、あと、どのようにして2つを比べるかっていうのが一番難しかったです。
ありがとうございます。So what she mentioned just now, one big difficulty is in terms of data. Their experiments are on very small scale using the marble, but they're trying to figure out what happens on a much, much larger scale on planetary length scales. And so the question arises, what data do you use and what methods do you use to bring the experiments and simulations together so that you can be talking about the same thing? That was one very big issue. So thank you, Wakana, for the answer. Let me just check the time. I think we have time for one more, and the questions are piling in to the chat. I will read out Chris's question, which was next. He says, I noticed the measure of kinetic energy was most acute when flour was used. Do you feel the type of material can dampen or amplify the kinetic energy released upon impact and thus affect the level of gas released? Who would like to take that?
Well, on day 2, the Japanese students when they were using the simulator, they did find that the different type of rocks that the asteroid impacted on affected the kinetic energy, or like how big the crater formed was in their kinetic energy. So the material that asteroid hits does affect to kinetic energy, but we didn't look at how that affects the gases released. So I don't know how you'd answer that part.
Okay, and I think, so I'm gonna sift through to Tomoko's question because I think it might be slightly shorter. How do you choose the material, I guess, for your experiments? If you have answered or explained already, I'm sorry, I missed it. Anyone want to say why you chose your materials?
Is this in reference to the simulation or the mayonnaise?
I believe the mayonnaise.
Well, I think, well, initially we were told just to use mayonnaise. However, the impact craters formed there weren't very good. So some people started experimenting with powders, and that ended up working a lot better, and forming bigger and better craters that we could measure and get more information out of.
Great, thank you very much. Okay, I think this is where we move on to another similar topic talk. So first, let's thank virtually Project One. It was a great talk. Thank you very much. Awesome. Okay, let's applause. Seen some great claps here. Fantastic. So we move on to the next talk, which is from Project Two. They will be presenting climate change mitigation role for nuclear energy, yes or no. They were supervised by Professor Geraldine Thomas from Imperial College. So if they would like to share their screen now and start.
Hello, we are exploring the role for nuclear energy within the field of climate change mitigation, and essentially we are looking at how much of a role we think the nuclear energy should play in that. So firstly, we want to thank our facilitator, Will Harvey, who has been very useful in translating back and forth between Japanese, as well as actually coordinating how we actually get to know each other. And we also like to thank Professor Geraldine Thomas, our scientist, who's been very good at explaining to us all these new concepts.
Firstly, our goal was to consider the problem in the field of science and work together regardless of our defined backgrounds, like nationality or character. Secondly, it was our aim that we increase our knowledge of nuclear energy and advise our government minister to be in favor of building more nuclear power plants as a suitable solution for climate change. Now, Josh and I are going to talk about our own personal goals on behalf of our team. During this workshop, my own goal was to use English actively and get correct information about nuclear energy and radiation. It was very difficult for me to communicate in English online.
My goal was to meet new people who have similar interests to me and learn more about nuclear energy. Next slide.
Both the UK and Japan have common climate change concerns. For example, there is a risk to island nations as sea levels continue to rise. It would be difficult to ignore the heat wave this week in the UK, the hundreds still missing after the floods in Central Europe, or the Atami landslide in Japan earlier in July. These extreme weather events are becoming more frequent, putting pressure on governments to take action against climate change. One way is switching to lower carbon methods at energy production. These pictures are taken from the live electricity map. Data is unavailable for some areas of Japan, which makes comparing energy sources difficult. However, the map shows that our countries still heavily rely on fossil fuels. Japan's proportion of nuclear energy dramatically changed after the Fukushima Daiichi. Prior to the accident, 30% of Japan's energy was generated by nuclear power. By 2019, this had fallen to 7.5%, following a significant increase in public distrust about government information on radiation. Next slide, please.
This slide shows introduction to nuclear energy, specifically covering how this works and positives and negatives. First, I explained the mechanism about the nuclear power. Please look at the picture. Nuclear power uses uranium as fuel. As the uranium undergoes nuclear fission, the cooling water in the reactor is passed through a heat exchanger and changes water into steam, turning a turbine. Because of this design, water touches the reactor core, never enters the environment. Second, the advantages of nuclear energy. There are two big positives: carbon-free, high-energy conventional efficiency. Lastly, the disadvantages. It produces nuclear waste and needs very high upfront cost. Also, to have fear for nuclear energy prevent the government from spreading this energy. Next slide, please.
The UK and Japanese nuclear policy differs massively. The UK government considers nuclear energy as part of its plan for achieving net zero carbon emissions by 2050 and approved 8 sites for nuclear power plants in 2010, including Hinkley Point C and Sizewell C. However, several of the other sites approved have yet to see any construction due to funding issues. In contrast, of Japan's 39 operable reactors, only 9 are currently operating due to public opposition after the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear accident. For example, the Yakata 3 reactor was initially approved to restart, but the local government intervened. Next slide, please.
As you heard a minute ago, one of the major problems with nuclear energy is the general public's opinion that it is too dangerous. However, this isn't actually true. As you can see on the image in the slide, it kills significantly less people than coal and only fractionally more than renewables. On Monday, we played a game where we had to match a radiation dose to an activity. For example, the dose given from a return flight to Japan. It turns out that living within 80 kilometers of a nuclear power plant for a year only gives you a dose of 0.0009 millisieverts, whereas living in England for a year on average gives you a dose of 2.4 millisieverts, where a sievert is a unit that measures the dose of radiation you've been exposed to. This further shows how nuclear isn't as dangerous as people think. Finally, no death resulted directly from the Fukushima Daiichi disaster. However, people did die as a result of evacuating from the tsunami and earthquake. Another disaster that puts people off nuclear is the Chernobyl nuclear disaster, which occurred due to human error during a test. In the resulting explosion, due to a buildup of steam, 2 plant workers died, and the following 29 people died in the coming months, 20 of which died from acute radiation sickness. However, even though this is bad, during the aftermath of the disaster, a drug was used to treat the acute radiation sickness, a drug called GM-CSF. It saved 106 of the 134 people who had acute radiation sickness, and to this day is used to help cancer patients with bone marrow recovery. So maybe it isn't so bad after all. Next slide, please.
Hydroelectric dams are a preferable energy source where they can be built due to their consistent energy production and very low running costs compared to other low carbon options.
While there are also disadvantages. For example, dams cannot be located everywhere, only where geography allows. In addition, there are risks of flooding and carbon dioxide methane emission may also be an issue. Construction of dams and reservoirs make the area full of water. Then plants underneath the water begin to rot and release greenhouse gases. Next slide, please.
Geothermal energy is generated from thermal energy in the ground, which is then transferred to electrical energy through the process in the diagram. The hot water is piped up where it enters a low pressure chamber, causing it to evaporate and turn the turbine.
I explained the 2 advantages of geothermal energy, reliable and renewable. Reliable means that this energy can keep on generating electricity 365 days, 24 hours, regardless of weather, season, day, and night. The second word, renewable. It uses local geothermal heat, so there is no need to import energy like you would coal.
The disadvantages of geothermal is that a specific location is required, usually on a tectonic plate, so not every country has access to it. Another disadvantage is that if not properly managed, the site can lose its heat and water supply. Finally, the building and operation of a plant causes habitat destruction and can cause minor earth tremors.
So wind energy is both renewable and can be sourced relatively locally to those who will eventually consume it. The energy is generated when wind causes a wind turbine to rotate, rotating a coil and converting mechanical energy to electrical energy ready for consumption.
It has two advantages. First, wind energy doesn't need fuel because it can generate electricity from wind only. Second, it is an efficient way of converting energy to electricity. The efficiency is said to be from 35 to 40%. This figure is relatively high and it's second only to hydroelectric energy.
So the disadvantages are that wind turbines themselves are really noisy and cause visual pollution, making them unpopular to local people. Wind farms also take up lots of space and they are unreliable. Energy generated is dependent on a factor that we cannot control. Next slide, please.
Solar energy is another renewable energy source, as it is accessible as long as we have the sun. The maintenance costs are low once installed, with minimal wear and tear. Solar panels are obviously restricted to areas with enough sun exposure. However, they can be installed in urban areas or unwanted brownfield sites. To increase yield on solar farms, it is possible to grow crops or graze cattle underneath panels.
Then I'll talk about disadvantages. First, many chemicals required for production are toxic. And leaked materials can break water supply and cause lung disease. Second, risk of landslides due to loose ground. It may cause buildings to break. Third, unreliable power supply. Because it depends on the sun, electricity cannot be produced on rainy or cloudy days or at night. Next slide, please. Nuclear fusion is generation of power by fusing light hydrogen nuclei into heavier helium nuclei. This is the sound process that happens inside stars. Fusion power generation uses the energy generated when deuterium and tritium fuse. So carbon dioxide is not generated. Also, because it is difficult to maintain a fusion reaction, it does not run away like nuclear fission. As mentioned earlier, hydrogen is used for fusion, so fuel can be extracted from seawater and is sustainable. Fusion produces more energy than fission and less waste. Fusion also has disadvantages. There has been no example of being able to obtain more output energy than input energy. The reason why fusion power generation is difficult to realize is that the plasma must be heated to 100 million Kelvin inside the device, and a strong electromagnetic field that confines the plasma is required. Next, sorry.
So as Sota previously mentioned, we have been unable to extract more energy from a nuclear fusion reactor than we put into it as of yet. And in fact, there's a saying that nuclear fusion is perpetually 30 years away. However, we are putting a lot of research into this issue. So for example, the largest research effort into a nuclear fusion reactor that generates more energy out than put in is at ITER, the International Thermonuclear Experimental Reactor. This effort is supported by 35 nations, and they are constructing the largest tokamak fusion reactor to date, which is scheduled to be switched on in 2026. A tokamak fusion reactor is a type of fuser that uses a strong magnet to trap the plasma into a toroid or donut shape, and you can see a picture of the construction efforts in the top right of the slide. ITER aims to generate 10 times more output power than input power, if only for brief intervals. But being an experimental reactor, it will be a proof of concept and will thus not be connected to the power grid.
When we look at the table, hydroelectric energy almost looks like an anomaly in terms of efficiency. Efficiency itself is the ability to avoid wasting materials, money, time, and energy. The high efficiency of hydroelectric energy is due to the unique shape of the turbine blades, which makes sure almost all water being pushed by the blades is used. When we look at the bottom row, we can see that low carbon doesn't mean that these energy sources are exempt from having damage on the environment. When resources need to be extracted from the ground, as seen in geothermal or nuclear energy, it's very difficult to avoid any greenhouse gas release. Comparative to the burning of fossil fuels, these are much more promising when thinking about climate change, however, where fossil fuels can cause large amounts of land degradation, water and atmospheric pollution. Next slide, please.
So during our research, we've developed a number of ideas of how we advise both the UK and Japan government on how to use nuclear power in the future. So firstly, we would advise building more nuclear power plants, especially since many of our current nuclear power plants are scheduled to be decommissioned within the coming years. We think the nuclear power plants are an excellent idea to be built because they provide a constant supply of power, unlike renewables, and they do not release greenhouse gases, unlike fossil fuels. Many nuclear power plants can act as a stepping stone to a wider adoption of renewable energy, though we're always going to need nuclear power just for that constant supply of power. We'd also advise improving public education about nuclear power, mainly because the majority of the general public are misinformed into thinking that nuclear power is much more dangerous and much more damaging to the environment than it actually is. However, a public education campaign could fix this. We'd also suggest investing much more heavily into research into new energy sources, such as modern generation 4 nuclear reactors, which are not only safer and more efficient, they are also smaller, which means they have lower upfront costs and can be built in many more places. Another candidate for investment is, as previously mentioned, nuclear fusion, which, if we can get it to work, will solve many energy problems. Lastly, we would also advise on the construction of underground nuclear waste disposal sites to minimize the environmental impacts of nuclear energy as we move into the future.
This is bibliography. We got much information from these pages. Now our group's presentation finished. Thank you very much for your kind attention.
Fantastic. Thank you very much for yet another interesting talk, very topical, as highlighted at the start, given current global circumstances. So I open the floor to questions. And yep, Simon Lewis has raised his hand. Sorry.
A lot of the,
yeah, sorry, go on.
Is that okay?
Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of the disadvantages that you highlighted for renewable was around its reliability. I know there's a lot of investigation around battery technology being linked directly to renewable, and that would then make it more, because you would store the energy from the renewable sources and then release it at times when maybe the wind wasn't so strong. Might that not be cheaper than building nuclear power stations, and certainly investing in a nuclear fusion reactor with kind of uncertain like probability of succeeding?
I think while batteries could be a promising technology for things like electric cars, on a large scale, it simply doesn't really work, mainly because conventional lithium-ion batteries require many expensive materials and the extraction of which these could damage the environment. And also because batteries have a limited number of cycles which they can be charged by. It just means that a very large battery, while it could be useful, isn't nearly as viable as something like a nuclear reactor, which is not only reliable, but does actually add to the power generation capacity of the grid. Of course, there are other ideas, like, for instance, pumping water up into lakes and then using the potential energy of the water in those lakes to store electricity. And these could be certainly viable, but I don't think these alone would have enough capacity to make the grid renewable only. So I think nuclear power is always going to have a place in our grid.
Great. We have another question from Lincoln Grasby, who asks, what's the best way of dealing with nuclear waste?
I can answer this as well, if that's okay.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, so currently there are 3 different classes of nuclear waste. There's low-grade nuclear waste, medium-grade nuclear waste, and high-grade nuclear waste. I think the one that people worry the most about is high-grade nuclear waste because it's the most dangerous and theoretically the most damaging to the environment. The strategy we have currently for dealing with nuclear waste is simply just burying it And I mean, it doesn't sound like a particularly sustainable strategy, but the volume of nuclear waste that we bury compared to, for example, the volume of conventional landslide waste that we bury is very minimal, and underground nuclear waste storage is unlikely to lead to nuclear waste actually damaging anything, because not only is it sealed under the ground, it's also buried with like 100 meters at least of earth between that and the ground. So it's not going to get into water supply. It's not going to actually damage people or the environment. So we think nuclear waste is not nearly as much of a problem compared to, for example, fossil fuels and greenhouse gases.
Thank you very much. Let's move on to the next project, project 3, titled Seeing the Unseen. This is supervised by Dr. Ganesh Namasivan from Kyoto University. So if this team would like to share their screen.
So this is our project, Seeing the Unseen, using big data analysis by Annie Sophie Aronisi, Jane Mutu, Jinsake, and with thanks to Dr. GP, Dr. Sanga, Mr. Yuto, and also our wonderful facilitators, Gar and Patrick. So at the start of this week, Dr. Elron emphasised the importance of questions. So in this workshop, we tried to ask a lot of questions, and hopefully today, by the end of this presentation, you'll know the questions we've discussed and their answers. You're probably wondering what I mean by big data, and what does big data actually look like? This is big data. It's quite a lot to take in, right? So what actually is big data? Sophie, can you say more?
Sure, Jane. So how big does something actually have to be considered big data? Small data is measured in megabytes, containing a few 100,000 records, and is used for things like the customer database of a small company. Large data is measured in gigabytes or terabytes and can contain a few million records and used for things like the customer database of a much larger company. Big data, however, contains millions and millions of records measured in gigabytes to petabytes, and its uses include customer service interactions and social media sites. Jinosuke, can you say more?
Yes, Sophie. Big data's main features are 5V. First, volume. Of course, big data is big as its name suggests, and we can get so much information. Second, variety. Big data has various information in many dimensions. Third, velocity. Various packages in recent years have made it possible to use big data more quickly. Fourth, veracity. Big data must have veracity. Big data should be accurate so that we can believe it. Finally, value. Because we make many important conclusions based on the other 4 factors, big data is valuable. So why do we need big data? Aaron, please.
Yes, Jinosuke. Big data, like all data, is needed to solve any problem there is. With one difference, this data is on a much larger scale. Big data is the information which can change a problem with lots of unclear results into a clear, suitable solution. With big data, we can tailor solutions for any fit near any problem, but without it, all future development is slowed down, all services are less efficient, and our world is less. So can you please say how we solve the problems?
Sharon. So we've talked about what big data is, but let's take a step back and look at where the idea of data collection started to solve problems in medicine even before the computer era. In the 18th century, before computers were developed, Edward Jenner invented the first ever blockchain in the world. He did this by collecting data, but on a much smaller scale than what we can collect today. Jenner was looking for a cure for smallpox, and incredibly deadly disease and at that time with no medicine. He got the data from the milkmaids who observed a unique pattern that when they are exposed to cowpox, a much less deadly disease, they were immune to smallpox. Jenner collected data by injecting people with cowpox, letting the disease run its course, then injecting them with smallpox. What the milkmaids observed was indeed true. Jenner performed the first ever vaccination in 1798, and centuries later, in 1980, the World Health Organization announced that smallpox had been eradicated. Junosuke, can you say more?
Sure, Conan. Not just smallpox. Many other diseases also get eradicated because of this one small observation and data collection. This kind of started the era of evidence-based medicine that was much more effective than the symptom-based medicine used before. Vaccine development usually takes about 10 years. Now, we are in the era of omics or information-based medicine. This facilitated us to achieve COVID vaccine in just 1 year, bringing hope to us. Where else is big data used? Sophie, can you tell case study?
Sure, Janosuke. There are potential applications of big data analysis in a wide variety of fields and situations. One very recent example of this is during the oxygen crisis in India. A major spike in COVID cases in India led to a shortage of oxygen in hospitals, meaning ventilators were not available for the patients who needed them. This unfortunately led to the loss of many lives. To solve the issue, the Indian Institute of Technology, Bombay, developed a new process to convert nitrogen generators into oxygen generators by using zeolite in the place of carbon in their molecular sieves. However, this process requires large amounts of zeolite, which presents its own problem: where to source the zeolite. A Google search will turn up vast amounts of unstructured and unreliable data. A technique called web scrapping was then used by Dr. GP's lab to convert this big data into structured data in just 24 hours. It was then given to the Indian government, who imported tons of zeolite to save many lives. This shows how big data can accelerate solutions where time is of the essence. Lucy, can you tell us a bit more about how we actually visualize the data?
Okay, so as we saw, this is what big data really looks like. It's a bit hard to understand what's going on, so we have to find ways to analyze and visualize what we've collected before we can actually go on to do anything useful with it. So for this, we use the programming language R, breaking the programs down into 3 key steps: data entry, the data frame, and the data analysis and presentation. The data entry section involves simply inputting the collected data in such a way that the program can understand. The data frame section organizes the data ready for processing. It's the equivalent of structuring the data in a table and then loading that into the computer. The process for it practically doesn't change between whatever plots you're hoping to create at the end of it. However, the final data analysis and presentation stage does vary a little more, as R has extensive built-in capacity to plot many different graphs and perform calculations to do so behind the scenes. But so this stage is still relatively simple. You select which graph you want, input into the function the data you want on each axis, along with presentation information like the color and general design. So this is where you would select whether you're creating a scatter graph, box plot, violin plot, or one of many other potential graphs. We enjoyed practicing with these codes to plot and visualize our favorite things like our favorite musics, holiday destinations, or food, or and various other things. So now that we know how to process it, what does the data actually look like? Ayumi?
Sure, Lucy. We learn to plot the same data in lots of different ways to understand different things about it. The summary diagrams, such as box plot, reduces the extent of the information and highlights just the essential data. For example, like this plot that shows the effect of lockdown on the sleep duration. However, it hides some trends like logarithmic relationships. Scatter graphs and box plots are generally useful for the data with 1 to 3 variables, as we as humans live in a three-dimensional world. But once we start quoting data with many more variables, it becomes hard to visualize and analyze, say 9 or 10 dimensions. For this, we use principal component analysis, PCA, a method of mathematical manipulation by which you can find correlation and represent the multidimensional data in 2 dimensions. As you can see here, these plots show that the variables like screen time, sleep, mood, and other factors are affected in lockdown. So what do? Now we know how to analyze big data. Here is Jen again.
We wanted to use our newfound knowledge of big data to ask a why not use big data question to visualize a common problem in our daily lives. A prominent factor in the news in everyone's lives in this past year has been COVID-19. So when we discussed what we wanted to find out, it came up as an issue, and we decided on our question, which is what impact has COVID-19 had on social life in the UK and Japan? Our hypothesis was that it had a worse effect on social life in the UK than in Japan. This is because Japan has never been in a lockdown. But how did we go about getting data to prove this? Aaron, can you explain?
To gather the information to test our hypothesis, we asked a series of questions via Google Forms, sending this form to be surveyed to participants and their friends or family. The questions we asked were, did your concentration time decrease during COVID-19? Was your eyesight negatively affected over COVID-19? Was your education affected as a result of COVID-19? Did your social media use increase? Did you lose contact with your friends? Do you feel like going out more after COVID-19? Did you start any new hobbies during COVID-19? I can't see it. I only had 2 other questions. We believe the main aspects of social life are social contact with friends, going out, enjoying hobbies, and other elements. Therefore, we ask questions regarding that. Due to the difference in ways each country has experienced COVID-19, we need to know what country surveyed individuals come from. The results from this, these questions were then exported to an Excel sheet, manipulated and analyzed. Yuta, can you please tell us what we did with the data?
Okay, and to get our results, we uploaded the clean data onto a web tool and visualize them using principal component analysis, which is where you simplify high dimensional data with lots of factors so that it has fewer dimensions, making it easier to visualize and analyze. We got a total of 150 responses from students in the UK and Japan, which are shown in the table above. And can you tell us what we found?
These results were visualized into a heat map where 1 represents yes and 0 represents no for each category. We can see that the majority of people's eyesight and screen time use has been affected by lockdown, and this may have negative health effects in the future. The scattering of the frequency of the colors in these categories suggests that it's prevalent in both countries. The graph also shows that 69.7% or 108 people said yes to wanting to go out more after lockdown. We suspect the majority of these are British people, as the lockdown here was stricter. Science in Latin means to know. Because of the crash course this week, we now know different ways big data can make us see the unseen solutions for problems in the world. We've used both existing data to create box plots using a coding program using R, and collected our own data using Google Forms to make a heat map explaining the effect of COVID on social behavior. This helped us to look within ourselves and ask important questions.
Through the communication of Japanese and British students, we've overcome language barriers and learned new things about each other's cultures and exchanged different ideas.
We've all enjoyed learning with our group throughout the week. Some things have been challenging but interesting, and we hope to put this new knowledge to good use in our future careers, wherever it may be, and see the unseen solution to any given problem. Thank you for listening.
Great, thank you very much once again. A really interesting talk and some fascinating concepts were discussed here. And we have questions now. I think Eric asks the question, where did your data come from and did you trust it?
That's really interesting. So the data we used at the start of the week was set data, which was given to us by Dr. Kupi. That was the stuff that we put into the programs ourselves and made on graphs. And then when we were discussing things and playing with the graphs, we asked each other questions. So we made a graph of everyone's favorite foods, favorite places, and stuff like that. We did like polls. Then we did the survey for our final data. So we had over 150 responses in the end, and most of them were from Japan. We do trust it. It's not big data. It's quite still small scale, because big data, we're talking thousands and thousands of responses, but it is, we do trust the data.
Great, thank you very much. Any more questions? Okay, we have a question from Ayana asking, why or what do you think it took this long for the COVID data to be analyzed?
I think when it comes to analyzing this sort of data, especially when it affects so many people, it takes you have to get a response from a lot of people if you're trying to be very accurate with it. So if you're talking on kind of the scale of governments making these sort of surveys, they have to reach out to a lot of people, and then they have to take that and put it into their programs and make sure they get accurate data to report to people. So it goes through quite a lot of error checking and fact checking, especially if it's going to the general public, in which case there will be a lot of people just kind of messing around on these sort of surveys. However, for us, it was fairly simple to collect the data from a smaller number of people and process it relatively quickly.
Thank you for the answer. And Ayana says thank you as well. Simon, well, actually, Simon, would you like to say your question as well? Trying to get a mix of me saying and people saying.
Okay, do you think that big data will mean that the skills a scientist needs are changing if they're going to be successful? And are universities changing their courses to reflect this?
Perhaps I could open the floor to some of the Japanese students as well. So I will also translate this. 日本の生徒のために、ビッグデータがこの先もっともっと大きくなってくる中、科学者としての技術とそれに伴って大学で教えられるコースは変化していってると思いますか? Any of the Japanese students, or we could have one of each, one UK, one Japanese.
I mean, I'm happy to answer it. I hugely, Dr. GP's doctor isn't actually in big data, it's another topic, and it's something that he's had to come and learn and do, and that he's found what really interesting. Like at the start of the week, I was like, data, I didn't know a lot about it. I was very like excited to learn more, and it's really interesting once you get into it and using it. And it's definitely a skill that a lot of people need, because everyone's like within science university, research is a huge part of that, and sharing your research is really important, and sharing, learning, growing. And with big data, we said this in the presentation, but it's currently we're using it to fix current problems. We can use it to predict and help solve problems that will come up in the future. So yeah.
Thank you. Maybe I can pick on one Japanese student from the group to answer as well. 日本からの生徒一人ちょっと選んじゃって、日本のことについて少し語ってもらおうと思いますけど、ごめんなさい。ゆうと箱崎さん。答えていただけますか？日本語で構えないので。
もう一回質問の内容いいですか？
はい。質問は、この先、ビッグデータがさらに大事なものになってくると思うんですけど、それに伴って科学者が必要とされる技術と、大学で教えられている、コース、授業などはそれに伴って変わってきていると思いますか？
自分はこれからもう変わっていくと思いますね。やっぱりなんか COVID-19 だったり、なんかこの先いろんな種類の様々なデータが多分取れると思うので、その中で今世間がどんなことを求めているのかとか、何を必要とされているのかがおのずと見えてくると思うので、そういったデータを生かしつつ、そういう学問に取り入れたら、この先良くなるんじゃないかなと自分は思います。
ありがとうございます。Just to wrap up, yes, he says definitely things are changing, particularly it's evident through COVID-19. And obviously as time progresses, people will be much clearer on what big data needs to be collected. And once we identify this and it's brought into research more actively, a lot of research will improve as well. Awesome. Thank you very much once again. So a big thank you to the team for presenting. That was a fantastic talk. Let's have applause again. Great. Thank you. Right on time. So let's go on to the next talk, project number 4, emergency planning against future great earthquakes and tsunamis. This was supervised by Dr. Anwat Suprasi from Tohoku University. So if they would like to present. Is someone speaking is on mute, or you're just getting ready?
Oliver, can I just check if you're ready to start the presentation?
Hello?
Yeah.
Okay, there we go. Sorry. Welcome to Project 4's presentation on emergency planning. In this project, we were investigating how tsunamis affect the port industries around Sendai, and we were tasked to come up with emergency plans against future earthquakes and tsunamis.
By utilizing publicly available bathymetry data through Google Earth, we could plot paths and view elevation profiles of the seafloor from historic or predicted epicenters to our target destination, Sendai Port. By using different resolutions and calculating average depths of the sea over that distance, we could calculate the speed of the tsunami wave over that distance as the square root of the seafloor depth multiplied by the acceleration of freefall. This formula shows that the speed of travel of the tsunami is directly proportional to the root of the sea depth at that point, meaning our approximations of depths over higher resolutions can produce erroneous results by not taking into account the non-linear nature of the seafloor. In the real world, this kind of calculations can be performed by a computer with much lower resolutions to produce more accurate results. By repeating this calculation process over the entire journey of the tsunami, we were able to calculate travel times for each section to come up with approximate times of onset for a given tsunami. The ability to predict these times is crucial for disaster planning to allow for different evacuation and defense precautions to be taken depending on how much warning can be given.
On the first day of the activity, we looked at how many minutes it would take for the tsunami to reach center port from the point shown on the slide. We took reading every 25 kilometers and reading every 10 kilometers so we could compare resolutions. Because shorter intervals would give more accurate tsunami speed. We used the equation on the slide to find the speed of the tsunami. To use the calculated speed, we found the arrival time of the tsunami, 67 minutes for the 25 kilometers intervals and 81 minutes for the 10-kilometer intervals. The information allows us to give a rough estimate of the time people would have to prepare for the tsunami, which would affect what they do in response. Also, people can decide how far they can evacuate in the given time.
Here we can see the speeds and travel times of a tsunami along the shown path originating from the Miyagi region towards Sendai Port. This data shows a small increase in time as the resolution changes from 25 to 50 kilometers before a large drop back down at 100 kilometers. These variations show that the seafloor along this path follows a non-linear fashion, giving these large approximations a significant degree of inaccuracy. These calculated values are only for the initial wave as it propagates through the ocean, and it is important to remember that tsunamis are a series of waves, often with the second wave more deadly than the first. This means there can be more time available than this model predicts for emergency evacuations to be carried out to prevent maximum loss of life or damage.
Our group investigated the tsunami arrival time of the Fukushima earthquake using the Google Earth. We divided the 154-kilometer distance from the earthquake epicenter to the Sendai port into the following intervals: 10, 25, 50, and 100 kilometers. The sea depth was searched for each interval, and the tsunami arrival time was then investigated based on these sea depths. The velocity of the tsunami depends on the sea depth, as other groups previously mentioned. Therefore, it becomes slower near the shore, where the sea depth becomes shallower. We found that the tsunami arrival time was approximately 80 minutes based on the arrival time at each interval. This result will help us to discuss the emergency planning, which will come out later.
So on day 2, we started calculating estimates for tsunami wave heights, and we can do this with the equation shown in the top left, which is known as Green's law. So you can see with the equation, as long as we know the sea depth at the point we're interested in, and also the sea depth and corresponding tsunami height at another point, we can actually estimate the height of the tsunami wave at any point we want. So the graphs on the far right show the sea depths at each marker, which is on the map to the left of that. And the graph at the bottom shows the height of tsunami waves at the markers TM1 and TM2. And our aim was to find the amplitude at the final marker on the map using this data here. So, and this data also represents the data for the 2011 Tohoku tsunami. So we calculated using the formula that at the GPS marker, the wave height would be about 7.8 meters, and at the final marker, it will be around 29 meters for this particular area on the coast. And you can see how this is pretty useful information, because if you know the height of the tsunami, then you can better prepare for the tsunami and also locate unsafe or safe areas to go.
This data is shows that the calculation of the height of tsunami. One of the tsunami's nature is that the shallower sea depths become, the higher tsunami is. The relative sea depth and amplitude is proportional connection, and this phenomenon is able to express such as a formula, Green law. Based on this slide, if point 2 of the height of the sea depth is 212 meters and the height of the tsunami is 0.40 meters, the height at point 1 will be 0.48 meters and around Sendai Port will be 1.53 meters.
And we calculated amplitude of tsunami by using Greensill, same as group N2, and a specially estimated ratio of how tsunami height amplitude will change. And we reached the result that if tsunami observed in point 1, sea depth 102 meters, its amplitude will be 3.2 times larger in Sendai Port. And tsunami observed in point 2 will 3.4 times larger when arrive at Sendai Port. And this is because tsunami speed will decrease as approaching to coast, and other waves behind them will be catch up with it and collide. And next, I'll explain Japanese. 2日目の課題までは、沖合で観測された津波が到達するときに何倍の高さになるかを、このグリーンの法則というものを使って調査しました。ここに書いてある通り4つ値を代入するんですけど、私たちは、比率を求めました。例えば、ポイント1を見ていただくと、水深102メートルの沖合で、1メートル観測されたと仮定すると、スモール H1 に102、ラージ H1 に1を代入すると、仙台港に来るときには 3.17 倍の高さになっているということがわかります。ポイント2も同様です。
For this activity, my group was given 2 different tsunami points of origin, one in the Japan Trench and one off Miyagi. The Japan Trench would have arrived in 77, the tsunami would have arrived in 77 minutes and had a height of about 4.4 meters. The off Miyagi one would have had an arrival time of 50 minutes and a height of 3.2. We then used a study conducted in 2011 to estimate how far people would be able to travel so we could choose areas for them to evacuate to. The blue ring shows 2 kilometers base, and that was approximately how far people traveled by car. And the red is 0.5 kilometers, which is approximately how far people were able to travel on foot. But these figures were affected by other, I can't think of the word, but 63% of people were delayed in leaving, which would have brought down the average distance traveled. 22% of those people went home, 21% went looking for family or friends, and a further 20% just completely ignored the warnings, assuming that no tsunami was coming. For our evacuation centers, we chose buildings that looked tall, that looked like they were in good condition, and were out of the immediate danger zone. You'll notice on the northeast side, there are areas that aren't covered even by the 2 kilometer driving distance. That is because the wave height was estimated to be about up to 5 meters there, and there were no tall enough buildings. And you'll notice that 0.6 is just a hill because there were no tall buildings in that area that would have been suitable evacuation sites.
Using the predicted height and velocity of the tsunami, we can, as well as the strength of different structures around the ports, we can estimate the damage caused by the tsunamis. So as you can see in the picture, the red shaded area would undergo approximately 5% of damage, blue approximately 5 to 10% damage, and yellow 10 to 15%. From this, we can begin to look at some realistic options to evacuate people from facilities and away from the coast. A good option would be getting to higher ground, but in Sendai, the nearest mountain is just under 40 kilometers away, so it isn't a very good realistic option. So there are a few other options we can look at, one of which being when we aren't under pressure of a tsunami, potentially moving people further away from the coast and closer to a mountain, or we could reinforce the foundations within the existing structures. Other options could be just to prepare people a bit more such as practicing the tsunami drill, which will help them not panic and know how to handle the situation a bit better. Maybe having quicker warnings so people have more time to evacuate, or implementing more physical barriers, such as seawalls in the ports, or increasing the height of them so they have more effect.
In my group, we had to find the impact of distant earthquakes and with the arrival time of over 2 hours and how they affect the port regions of Japan. We discovered that because the wave height is generally unknown, and in comparison to the previous slides, less damaging and destructive, as they're normally smaller than tsunamis resulting from closer earthquakes. We decided that the best plan of action would be to evacuate residences and businesses as soon as possible to higher ground or suitable shelter, as there'd be enough warning for a full-scale evacuation. In the long term, we suggested a seawall surrounding the residential areas of Sendai Port, limiting the damage as well as starting to urbanize the area to the west, which is of higher ground, which would help limit damage in the future.
Next, I'll talk about the limitation of our group. We used Green's rule to calculate the height of the tsunami, but the rule becomes less accurate near the coast. This is because of a wave deflection and reflection caused by the land. Therefore, predicted wave height of have a degree of inaccuracy.
We've also assumed that tsunamis originate from a single point, but in reality, they can come from sort of a strip at a tectonic boundary. So the image in the top right shows a horizontal rupture at a plate margin, and you can see this is more of a band rather than a single point. And taking this into consideration would change our tsunami arrival times, as some points on the coast would be closer to the origin of the tsunami than previously simulated. And another limitation is the unpredictability of people. You can have a great evacuation plan, but at the end of the day, it's up to the public to actually evacuate themselves. And as we have seen, many people often go back home or look for family when they should be evacuating, and some don't even evacuate at all. So the success of the evacuation plan is dependent on the success of the people, is dependent on the people evacuating themselves.
Overall, we have learnt by working in groups over the past week the physics behind tsunamis, their structure, and how to predict their arrival times depending on their distances. We've also discovered how Japanese authorities prepare effective countermeasurements even when tsunamis, given their unpredictable nature, are as destructive as they are, and how they try to limit the damage they cause while also saving as many lives as possible. Thank you for listening, and thank you to the supervisors and facilitators for their time and help. Are there any questions?
Once again, thank you very much, project number 4, for an excellent talk. Very well delivered and really fascinating insights. I open the floor to questions. Just at this point, we've had a lot of questions from the teachers and the other members. I encourage more of the students to perhaps ask questions as well. So let's see if anyone has questions. Dylan has his hand raised.
Can you think of any ways that you could use, I guess, some of the concepts explored in the other projects for this, or maybe the other way around, maybe the skills in this project 4 to help the other projects, maybe? Can you think of any ways they could be connected?
Well, for the nuclear energy project, of course, because part of our project was identifying vulnerable areas on the coast, and for nuclear energy, this would be quite a vulnerable area, especially for tsunamis, such as the Fukushima power plant. So we could possibly implement that to try and mitigate the hazard to nuclear plants, and also estimating the heights of tsunamis and the time of arrivals could give the plant time to, they could know when to shut it down so it can has enough time to cool, or even build a high enough seawall for predicted likely earthquakes and tsunamis.
Hope that answers your question, Dylan. Yeah, okay, we have another question, which I might also pose in Japanese as well. How far from the shore do we need to measure the height of the wave for people to escape? 沖合からどれぐらいの距離から、波の高さを測定しなきゃいけないですか？人がちゃんと避難できるように。
I can answer that one.
Yep.
It truly depends on the location, because a heavily wooded area would stop the wave a lot more efficiently than some buildings would. If there was in some parts of Japan, they've got raised railways along the coast to act as effectively as seawalls. So it just depends on what area you're looking at to how far in you need to measure, because in different areas, the same tsunami would travel different distances. So it's a case by case or area by area basis.
Cool. Thank you very much. Ellen has her hand up. Ellen.
Sorry, just a quick question. Do you think that man-made construction, such as buildings that maybe aren't regulated properly, could make tsunamis more dangerous?
Maybe again, I'll translate to Japanese. 人が作ったもの、建物などは津波の影響を悪化する可能性ってありますか？ Maybe I could ask a Japanese student just to get a bit of balance. 日本の方、ボランティアいますか？答えていただける。
If no one's going to answer, I can answer that one as well.
Go for it.
I can answer to change if you want.
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah. There's examples of not necessarily man-made buildings, but man-made forests that have been used as to create a barrier. Instead of using like a concrete wall, they use a man-made forest of pine trees, I think it was, and with the straight trunks, and they thought that they'd be able to stop the force of the tsunami. But by stopping the force of the tsunami, they also created all this like debris. So all the debris from the pine trees all got washed back into all the residential areas and caused more problems due to the debris and more damage because of the debris than it would have helped. Even though you stopped the full force of the tsunami damaging all the residential area, you still have all the problems that the debris caused by being washed onto the areas themselves. So there are positives and there are negatives of using man-made structures, but then again, if it wasn't there, there's always the argument of would it have been more damaging than if it was there.
Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. Okay, we are running out of time here, so let's quickly move on, but thank you once again to the team for another great talk. Virtual applause all round. Very good. So we come to our final group, taking a bit of a pivot, but still staying very topical. And so we have our science communication team, project number 5, a professional workshop podcast. So this was led by Dr. Ava Higginbotham and Dr. Sally LePage from the Naked Scientist team in Cambridge. So if they would like to present.
Can everyone see the screen I'm sharing?
Yes.
Yeah, right. So Sharon, do you want to start us off then?
Yes, sure. Welcome to the workshop 5 presentation, where we worked with the Naked Scientists looking at science communication. And our aim for the week was to create a professional podcast of the entire workshop. Next. So, science communication is the practice of informing, educating, raising awareness of science-related topics, and increasing the sense of wonder about the scientific discoveries and arguments. And this is what we focused on for the week. At the beginning of the workshop, Sally and Eva gave us some questions related to science communication that we as a group answered and compiled our answers. On the screen, you can see a few of our answers. From then, we were given the task to create our own podcast after being split into 3 groups, interviewing 4 of the other groups. And here are our different groups.
Hi, we're group 1. So Ayane, do you want to tell us, Ayana, do you want to tell us about your, oh wait, sorry, podcast clip first. Sorry about that.
We can't hear it, Ellen. You need to screen share, tick the box that says share sound.
I'm so sorry.
It's all right.
So the Fukushima power plant was located on the coast. Was that a risky thing to do? Why was the reactor there?
Konnichiwa. I'm Ayane, and with me are Koki and Ellie. Today, on this short podcast, we want to look at the question: 原子炉を海岸沿いに置くことは、それによる利益と伴うリスクでは、どちらが大きいと思いますか?
Nuclear reactors on the coast. Does the risk outweigh the advantage?
What are the advantages and disadvantages of having nuclear power anyways?
Well, nuclear power can be an energy source with no greenhouse gas emissions. They can provide 24-hour energy in any weather, and also they're cheap to run.
They're expensive to build though, and they create radioactive waste that is difficult to dispose of.
Okay, so that was just a minute clip of our podcast. So everybody's podcast will be about 5 to 8 minutes long in total though. All right, over to Ayana.
Konnichiwa, I'm Ayane. I'd like to express my impressions. The reason I joined Nichie Science Workshop this time is because I thought it would be one of the experiences to make my dream come true. But at first, I was so worried that I felt sad because I couldn't do anything. At the time, my friends helped me. 私には優しい仲間たちがいました。This is the first time I've realized the language barrier and learned the meaning of breaking it. 私たちに必要なもの、それは思いやりでした。It was an opportunity to realize once again that we are living together. It was a really precious 5 days. I will never forget this experience. That's all for my presentation. ご清聴ありがとうございました。
Hi, konnichiwa. Watashi wa Ellen Johnson desu. I'm from Hinchley Wood School in England, Surrey. So in this workshop, we learned how to interview professionally and then relay those ideas back in a way everybody can understand. And with that, I learned how important it is to communicate with other scientists, especially from different cultures and backgrounds, to discover new points of view so that our own research and opinions can improve. It's also important to communicate scientific discoveries back to everyday people, as a lot of scientific discovery is to help those very people. I like this phrase that science communication is the bridge between people and science, because it's really important to bridge that gap. The skills I learned in this workshop will help me so much in the future, because I want to pursue a career in optometry, which is a profession that really requires communication between science to everyday people about their eye conditions and things like that. Dr. Sally and Dr. Ava were there every step of the way to share their knowledge, so thank you very much to them. This was an amazing experience to be a part of, so thank you to everyone who made it possible. I had so much fun. There were so many times where we couldn't stop laughing in the evenings when we were working on our work. So thank you. Over to Koki.
Hi, I'm Koki Okano from Senior High School attached to Kyoto University of Education. Through this workshop, I wanted to achieve the ability to explain interesting and understandable. I was actually very nervous because the very first activity that we did was brainstorming and sharing ideas, which isn't something I do in school often. With help from Eva, Sally, our group was able to proceed very smoothly. I enjoyed writing interview questions and the script with Ayane and Ellen because I could see their ideas I never would have come up with. I also enjoyed chatting throughout the day with students from Fukushima and UK exchanging opinions. Using this experience, I want to learn further about science communication, learn new languages, which I love doing, and work as a bridge connecting communities. I believe that science communication is just a fundamental step to advancing and improving or just saving the future. 私はサイエンスコミュニケーションは今の技術を未来につなげる第一歩だと感じました。Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much. That's all from group
Thank
one.
you very much.
Yeah, on to group two.
Hi, so we are group two. So that's me, Sharon Anthony, with Dylan and Ray. And we also did the podcast. Next slide, please.
What do you conclude from the results?
Well, a lot of what we're doing is showing how some methods of investigating impact craters, how they work and why they work, and how different methods have different applicabilities to studying different problems. So we've been looking at running experimental impact craters, which is really good because it's quite a practical and hands-on way, and it's quite easy to go about measuring things and doing things. But you can't do a large-scale impact cratering event in the lab. So we're also looking at the Chicxulub impact event, which famously wiped out the dinosaurs. But you can't simulate, you can't do that in a lab. It's too big, it's too energetic. So you have to use numerical simulations. So what we're really doing is we're trying to show how you can sort of bridge the gap across observations and models with what we're doing.
How can these results help?
I mean, the important thing about this for the future is that by understanding how we can go about looking at different scales of understanding impacts and impact events, we potentially get an insight into what the consequences of large impact events are for the future of the Earth. I mean, impacts pose a hazard to present day human beings. So if we can understand something about what those hazards are, then we take a step closer to being able to mitigate those risks.
Okay, so this will be my views and my sort of thoughts on this. So one of the things I learned from this is that communication is key. A lot of the time there may have been some sort of, not necessarily a breakdown, there may have been some slight difficulties and we all had to get through that. And that you cannot know if you do not ask. I think that all of us asked the questions we needed to Sally and Eva whenever we needed to. We weren't afraid to ask questions, which was very good. And the scientists are not really scary, incredibly intellectual people for the most part. I know that for Sally and Eva, they were very, they definitely did seem like very normal people, as did all the scientists that we interviewed and that we've seen throughout the week. And also that science isn't just about the results. We all had fun in the process of making our podcasts and just talking while we were making them, and it was very fun. And that because we were all trying to get towards this one goal, we were all able to work very well together, because as I would say, that progress is a very universal language. And there are always people who don't know, so there need to be people like Sally and Eva, and hopefully us in the future, if we decide to go into podcasting, maybe, who can let others know and reduce the ignorance in the world of particular things in science, hopefully. And that is essentially what I would say the project is about to me. And I would like to thank Sally and Eva and the facilitators for helping us understand that.
Hello there and konnichiwa. My name is Raya Shimada from Senior High School attached to Kyoto University of Education. I thought a key about when I was participating in project, this key is understanding. Understanding is very, very important. In this project, especially about language and science, and first, I'm gonna about the language. For example, there is one Japanese student. He isn't good at English, so he can't tell his opinion. Second, about science, I think this project is telling about other projects easy to understand. So we should about other projects. And in conclusion, understanding is key, especially language and science. But I think trying and don't be shy is most important. That is our group 2 announcement. Thank you for listening.
Good morning, everyone. I'm aware we're running a little bit tight on time. So Ellen, are you okay just to go straight onto our clip on the next slide, please? Let's move on to the next topic of destruction. The next topic is about asteroid impacts. The key application to this is the effect on climate change.
We're going to interview Simon Kronhuis, who is working with Group 2 this week.
How can we be sure that it was an asteroid that hit Earth?
Well, interestingly, all around the Earth at this time, there were deposits of a very rare element called iridium integral. There is also a massive crater, hundreds of kilometres wide, which is associated with the exact time of this impact, which is a pretty big clue.
Thank you very much for playing those, Ellen. So I'm just going to talk about some of my favourite parts in the week. The script off to the left-hand side on the next slide is in Japanese. It's not exactly what I'm saying, it's more of a summary. Go to the next slide, please. So this week I did a lot of research. I was researching in some of the different groups. So I went through all of your PowerPoints and I wrote a 5-page document summarizing lots of different things. And then we decided to go ahead with a couple of the different projects. We took Group 1 and Group 2 especially. And we needed a way to tie these together. And one of the highlights for me of the week was when I came up with the kind of concept of our podcast, which was dealing with myths of mass destruction. And that was the way that we tied Group 1, the planetary catastrophe, and Group 2, the nuclear, the group looking at nuclear energy together. And that was really interesting for me. And then I had to go away and plan the interview. Can we have the next slide, please? And planning this interview was really quite difficult, actually. And I found it really challenging. It's probably one of the most challenging things I've done. And you can see here on the slide a load of different things that I had to work through after we did the interview. So when we were editing it down to get it down to a reduced version, I started with 9 minutes of audio and I needed a maximum of 2 minutes. So I was there cutting it down, having to pick and choose was really difficult. And you can see you wind up taking these very tiny clips, and we had to then send those on to Sally and Eve to edit it down. But it was really good fun and it was a really good challenge for me. So yeah, I think I'm passing on to Maddie now.
Hi, I'm Maddie and I'm from Abbey Gate Sixth College. So in our group over the past week, we've been preparing and recording a podcast about nuclear power and asteroid impacts. Then it's going to be published on the Naked Scientists website. So I wanted to get involved in this project so that I could work with new people from different cultures. I was also interested in science communication in particular, as I really enjoy being creative within media. So that I thought that this would be able to help me develop those skills further. Working on this project has made me realize how much work goes into producing a podcast, as I was given the role of producer. I believe that the skills I have developed from this project will help me go in the future, especially as I'm looking to go into media and marketing. I have loved working with Isaac and Kaho, and I think that we have worked really well together to produce our final product. So thank you to everyone who has made this possible.
Hi, I'm Kaho Hashimoto and I'm from Fukushima High School. I'm going to talk about what I did and what I learned in this workshop. The theme of our podcast was dealing with myths of mass destruction. It was hard for me to use a language other than my mother tongue to proceed with my research, and I put it together in podcast. I mainly played a role of writing a script and presenting it on a podcast. On the second and third days, in addition to the survey into the content of their groups done by my coworkers, I also conducted an investigation on nuclear power myself. Nuclear power and radiation are familiar topics for me living in Fukushima, and it was very interesting. I learned a lot about the use of nuclear energy in the UK, as well as the use of nuclear energy in Japan. We discussed what science communication is on the first day. Based on the content at the time, I tried my best with my limited English ability to understand how to convey science to listeners in an easy to understand way. Above all, it was good experience to be able to hear directly from a person who is actually active in a podcast called The Naked Scientists. What exactly is science communication? What is a podcast that listener can easily hear and want to hear? We decided to talk about nuclear energy and asteroid collisions that we interviewed on our podcast. I really learned a lot of things, and it was exciting to work with people from different cultures. That's all for me. Thank you.
And thank you so much to Sally and Eva for organizing everything and all the advice. Thank you for listening. ご清聴ありがとうございました。Any questions?
Great. Thank you very much. Again, a breath of fresh air from just science and talking about the other important aspects of science. Eric, are you happy for questions to go on? We are 10 minutes behind the schedule, but maybe we have time for a couple of questions.
I think it would be, I think if we can afford to miss, can you hear me? If we can afford to miss our break, which I don't think is absolutely necessary, I think we can go on for a couple of minutes. We've got to, Mary Grace has warned us that the Olympics are opening in the near future, so we have to bear that in mind as well.
Okay. Maybe we can have a couple, one or two brief questions. I see that Gar has written a question. Okay, very quickly. Science communication has become all the more important during the COVID-19 pandemic. How can we mitigate the risks of spreading misinformation in the mainstream media, social media, which can have direct consequences on the health and well-being of people in our societies?
So a quick thank you to Gar. He looked after us on Saturday. Thank you, Gar. So I think with social media, we did discuss how that can spread false information. And I think it's always great to take responsibility on yourself to check your sources, like see if like the YouTube video you're watching, does it have a link in the description to the article maybe they got some information from? And maybe more like, I think schools, like education always stems from schools. And I think right now in present, I think schools are kind of developing because obviously the internet has opened up only in the recent time really, and meshed with school. I think schools are becoming better and better at educating students about false information and how to check everything is real. Yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. One more question, Eric, or should we?
Perhaps we ought to come to an end because it's 11 o'clock now, isn't it?
Awesome.
And do we want to try to, does there seem to be a really relevant question on your list? Or?
As in all questions are relevant.
All questions are relevant, but really exciting.
Yeah, how to say, all the questions are on the chat. So if people are happy to keep answering on the chat, please do so. We have had a couple of unanswered questions and people have been answering on the way. But if you could respond to those, it would be great. So let's wrap up here. Once again, a big well done and thank you to all the students. Some fantastic presentations this year round. Really good stuff. And I really enjoyed listening to all of them. So with that, I'll close this session and I'll hand back to Eric.
Thank you very much. And what a fantastic series of lively, clear presentations we've had. And we thank all the students and the scientists and the facilitators for that. The enemy has been time all the way through. And bear in mind that people have been meeting together for their scientists just for 3 hours since Monday. And they've managed to get to grips with some very important issues and do some really deep thinking and come up with some very good presentations. I think that it's a shame we don't have more time to explore in much more detail what was being presented, and I think Rio has noted the number of questions we've been getting in which we haven't been able to deal with. But here, I don't want to rabbit on. I'd like to introduce some of our friends and guests who I'd like to invite to make some comments. Is Martin Rees here?
Yes, I am. Yeah.
Okay. This is, I'd like to introduce Sir Martin Rees, Professor Sir Martin Rees, who is also known as Lord Rees of Ludlow, Astronomer Royal, formerly President of the Royal Society and Master of Trinity College, Cambridge. Over to you, Martin.
Well, thank you, Eric. These have been a wonderful set of presentations this morning. I've really enjoyed them and learned a lot. And I'd like to offer greetings from Cambridge University to everyone involved in this week's events. Cambridge University has been closed down all this year, of course, and that happened once before in 1665. That's when there was a plague, and our best student at that time, Isaac Newton, went back home to where he lived on a farm, and famously he had his great idea when he was sitting under an apple tree, and he saw the apple fall, and it led him to think that it was falling by the same force that held the moon in its orbit. Well, I'm looking forward to seeing whether any of our students return this year with equally deep insights. I'm hopeful, but I don't expect very much. But things have changed in the world clearly over that time. And in this present pandemic, of course, the downside is that because of air travel, the pandemic has spread worldwide far faster than it would have done otherwise. But on the other hand, we've had the internet, which has kept us in touch and indeed allowed us to have wonderful events like this one you've been having this week. And I think what's very important is that communications now allow us to share different cultures across the world, and will allow us, of course, to share the Olympic Games, which is something which brings all the world together. But in science, these communications are especially important because science is the one truly global culture. Protons and proteins are the same everywhere in the world, and so scientists can straddle all boundaries of faith and nationality far more than any other communities. And of course, they have not only given us the internet, but of course, they are going to be our salvation from pandemics because of the vaccines which have been developed by a worldwide effort. And I think it's been interesting that the presentations we've had this morning have all been sort of rather gloomy. They've talked about disasters and how we should cope with them. Indeed, this century, the 21st century, is going to be rather special because it's the first when one species, the human species, really does determine the future of the planet, because there are more of us than ever before. The population is nearly 8 billion now. It'll rise to 9 billion by mid-century. And we are having an effect on the entire planet. We're changing the climate, as everyone knows. We are risking causing mass extinctions. And it's terribly important that we use science and deploy science in a way that minimizes these risks and copes with them. And we've seen examples in the presentations about how we can get energy, how we can prepare against disasters, etc. And it's clear that we are going to have clever techniques for getting food and also for getting our energy. And here again, I think this is especially important in the context of an event for young people, because most of the people on this call today will, one hopes, be alive until the end of a century. And the trouble is that most politicians have a shorter horizon. They don't think far enough ahead to realize that in the second half of the century, things are going to be very different. And so I think we are going to depend on the clever ideas that come from those who are now entering science in order to get safely through this very challenging but very wonderful century. And also, I think we should hope that the younger scientists will communicate with their fellow citizens who aren't all scientists, so scientific communication is very important, and also with their politicians, because politicians won't respond, they won't do the right thing, they won't plan long term unless they know the public cares. And that's why charismatic individuals, and let me mention 4 very different ones: Pope Francis, David Attenborough, Bill Gates, and Greta Thunberg. All those people have had a global influence in raising consciousness and making people care about the long term. And of course, the generation of people involved in this event, now starting scientific careers, are going to be the people who can keep banging on about this and to show that science can not only help us to understand the world, but help us to change the world in a way that can be benign and avoid all the downsides. And so I've gone on long enough, but let me just congratulate all the people who've produced such high quality material this week, and to thank the organizers and above all Eric for all they've done to keep this event going under these very unusual circumstances. And let me express the hope that next year you'll all be able to come back for real to Cambridge University. So thank you very much indeed, and congratulations to everyone involved in this event, and best of luck to all the participants if they have scientific careers, because those careers are going to be crucial for the world this century. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Martin, for those words. Just to comment on your comment, many more people are involved in putting a lot of effort in than me. Not just me, Martin, but many others.
Sure.
Could I now pass to Ms. Akiko Kawakami, who's First Secretary Science, Technology and Innovation from the Embassy of Japan in London.
Thank you, Eric. Hello everyone. Hello, every student. I have been working at the embassy for 1 year, but this is the first time I have seen such collaborative work by students and very impressed. Also, Mr. Mizuta, Ryo-san, thank you for your contribution to moderate their presentation. From the first and fourth team presentation, I was impressed to see that each research process was not just conceptual, but based on simulation and detailed calculation. For the final presentation, it was very interesting to do research from a different angle than the other teams. As the investigation and research have been conducted in just 1 week, I sincerely appreciate that every student has been dedicated to working very, very hard. Excellent work. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Ms. Kawakami. We are indeed very, very grateful to have the interest of the embassy in our work, and we hope we can make a small contribution to building UK-Japan interaction and friendship, particularly for science, but particularly for young scientists. Could I now ask Professor Alex Boxenberg, the professor of experimental, emeritus professor of experimental astronomy at Cambridge University and former director of the Royal Greenwich Observatory and a great friend, to say a couple of words as well. Alex, you there? I know Alex is there because I've seen him. How, there we are. You're mute. It's okay. You're mute. Fine. No, you're mute and then you keep changing. You're mute. You're mute. Okay. Still can't hear you.
Just to step in, it's not the fact that it's mute. I think there's a problem with the microphone itself.
Okay. Can we give him any quick advice, do you think?
Next to the mute button, there is an up arrow where you can select which microphone you're using.
Hmm. Ah. Okay. Well, perhaps we should move on to the next speaker, and perhaps come back to Alec in a few minutes. So the fourth person we've asked to say a few words is the Earl of St Andrews. He is a patron of our little charity, Clifton Scientific Trust, and is also chairman of the Great Britain Sasakawa Foundation. Lord St Andrews, are you there? I know.
Yes, I am.
Good.
Thank you very much, Eric. I'd like to say how much I've enjoyed this morning's presentations, and I can give my congratulations to everybody who has taken part. I learned a lot and find it absolutely fascinating. And as I'm hugely impressed by what you've achieved in difficult circumstances, working at a distance from each other. And I think you deserve a lot of credit, and I hope you've enjoyed it. I'm delighted that see so many people participating in this international collaboration. It's exactly the kind of thing that we at the Great Britain Sasakawa Foundation that support and encourage. I think there's nothing more valuable than bringing young people together to share and exchange ideas and spark ideas off each other, as we've seen this morning. And in fact, although science is a universal language, and as we've heard from Martin Rees, it's a global culture of its own. But nonetheless, I think bringing people together from different backgrounds, different cultures, different parts of the world, I think we get different questions, different perspectives, different ways of looking at things. So I think that's a very valuable part of this kind of collaboration. I must say, I enjoyed many aspects of this morning's presentations, such as the ingenious use of marbles, mayonnaise, and cocoa powder in the first presentation, and then learning and then seeing different ways of visualizing big data, learning about concepts such as web scrapping, which I must say I haven't come across. I was interested to see that those looking at different kinds of energy actually came out with a positive view of nuclear energy, which is not always the case with younger scientists today. And in the end, of course, there was the great importance attached to science communication, and particularly in an era where there's so much misunderstanding of science and so much misinformation. So we clearly need as much both science education and communication as possible. I think there's not very much more that I need to say, as I know you're all keen to go and watch or many of us will be keen to go and watch the opening ceremony of the Olympics. And in fact, what a wonderful coincidence it is that we have this meeting today on the same day as the opening of the Olympics. Two examples of global cooperation and sharing of achievement. So congratulations to everybody. Many thanks to all those who've helped set this up, and all those who've given their time to bring people together and encourage them. And best wishes for the future to all those who've taken part. And I hope we see you again in your future careers. So thanks to everybody.
Thank you very much indeed, Lord St Andrews. It's really good to have your support. We really appreciate it. And shall we just pop back to Alec Boxenberg and see if he's managed to sort out his little gremlins? Is Alec there? Have you meant no joy? Oh dear. Oh joy. Oh dear. Anyway, it's nice that you came along. Perhaps we have to miss, if by chance before the end you come up with something, let us know. And Alex has been a tremendous supporter of our work right the way through, and has always attended our workshops, which we've had since 2001. And not in the early days, because he didn't know we were in Cambridge since 2010, but since 2010 he's very much been involved. Okay, so let us move on. And many interesting things came up in the presentations. I like the idea of the myths of mass destruction, which was a focus of one of the presentations. Could we now ask for some comments on what they've experienced and any other thoughts? Firstly, from some British and Japanese students and some from British and Japanese teachers. So could I ask Isaac Todman from St Mary Wycliffe and Temple School in Bristol to say something?
Good morning or good afternoon, depending on whether you're in the UK or Japan. I think this week has been absolutely wonderful. It's been really lovely to be with you all. It's been a real delight to be here. Yeah, I'm Isaac Todman, as Eric said. I'm currently in Bristol at St Mary Wycliffe and Temple School. I just want to start this morning by thanking some of the real key people who have been just organising all of these wonderful things that we've been able to do. So firstly, the Clifton Scientific Trust, together with Dr. Albone, to each of the sponsors, the Sasakawa Foundation, to Mitsubishi Electric, to the Japanese Women Association in Great Britain, to Kyoto University and to Barclays, and to those who have been working behind the scenes, Mary Grace Browning, Ian Price, and Professor Toshio Nomura, to name a few. And there's just so many wonderful people who've been involved in this. Actually, I'd really like to thank Rio as well. He's done a wonderful job at linking together presentations in both the opening and the closing ceremony. So thank you very much to Rio too. Now that could just sound like a list of names and a list of companies, but actually I'm incredibly grateful to each of them. As although I may not fully understand the extent to which they've made sacrifices to enable this week to happen, I can testify to the fun it's been, to the knowledge I've gained, and to the skills that I've really grown in. And as I talk about some of the things that I've learned, some of the things that I've really appreciated about this week, I hope it'll help us just to see how each of those people and each of those organizations has really blessed and helped each of us as students. And yeah, I also just want to thank the Japanese students. Language barriers sometimes present problems, but actually this week, just hearing how much English you guys can speak, you've often been very quick to apologize for your English, but I just want to say it's truly, truly remarkable how much you can speak. It's been really lovely getting to know you, and yeah, crossing language barriers and cultures has been a real highlight of this week for me. I've also learned lots of new things. I really enjoyed sitting in on Professor Thomas's lecture on the health effects of radiation. Actually listening to that's really changed my position on nuclear power. It was really insightful to me as someone who really enjoyed watching HBO Chernobyl to find out how much of that is factually incorrect. And the vast amounts of scientific material she was able to give in that very short space of time was really helpful. And I'm sure you guys have appreciated lectures too. I really appreciated going away and looking at lots of those links that Professor Thomas shared with us. And I really enjoyed going away and looking at those and having a chance to reflect. Take a moment to reflect now. Reflect on the things that you've learned this week. And let's be thankful to all of those we thanked earlier for what they've been able to provide for us. Finally, I've learned many, many new skills. Conducting an interview, as I said earlier, is probably one of the hardest things I've ever done. But learning from the project leaders, being taught about what makes an effective speaker, going and doing research and having to format that very carefully into a podcast appropriate format, required me to learn new skills, required me to overcome many barriers. And I'm sure you've had to do the same. I'm sure you've learned lots of new, really important skills that you can take away with you that won't just be good on a personal statement or a CV, but it will be applicable in your day-to-day lives. And I think from the three things I've just mentioned above, I've clearly missed two key groups of people from my thanks at the start. Firstly, the facilitators. Though the Japanese students' English has been really, really good, you've bridged the gap between us as students and not just on a linguistic level. Thank you for the things you ran on the Saturday and just enabling us to get to know one another really well. It was, yeah, just a real blessing to be able to get to know lots of different people. Thank you very much, facilitators. Secondly, project leaders. This week revolves around your knowledge and expertise. I was very grateful for Eva and Sally's work with my workshop in Group 5, but I'm sure you're very thankful to your project leaders too. If it wasn't for their expertise, their knowledge, all the stuff they've been able to teach us, their skills, we wouldn't have been able to learn what we've been able to work this week. So thank you for being so willing to share them with us this week. Your lectures have been engaging, your encouragement's uplifting, and your guidance has really helped me just to grow. So thank you. And now just a final word just to my peers, to the other students. Thank you so much for being so wonderful, for engaging with me. It's been lovely getting to know some of you. Yeah, all that remains for me to say is thank you. Arigatou gozaimasu.
Thank you very much indeed, Isaac. Could I now hand on to Mr. Alexander Bishop, who teaches at Hinchley Wood School in Esher.
Hello, everyone. So I'd like to say a few words on behalf of the UK teachers. So I've been involved in these workshops for quite a long time, I think since 2014, and I've had the great pleasure of taking students both to Cambridge and to Tohoku University in Japan. But this is the first time it's been done online, and what an excellent experience it has been. It's been lovely to pop into the sessions throughout the week and of course listen to all of the presentations at the end. I'd just like to say some thank yous. So firstly, thank you to the project leaders and to the scientists for coming up with some excellent projects that could be conducted online, and for giving up so much of your time so freely. I'd like to thank the facilitators. They've done a tremendous job of ensuring the smooth running of the groups, and not to mention translating for hours and hours at a time. It's a very, very difficult job, no mean feat in doing that. So thank you to those people. Thank you, of course, to the sponsors for providing support and money as well. And I'd like to thank Toshio Nomura, Mary Grace Browning, Ian Price, and of course Eric Albone for all of their efforts in putting this workshop together. I think it would have been very easy to say that they couldn't put on a workshop this year because of the pandemic, to say, oh, we'll just do something next year instead. But I think their determination to do something for the students has been quite incredible. They've had to completely redesign the workshops so they could be conducted online, and had to overcome a multitude of technical and logistical challenges to make the workshops a success. So I am enormously grateful for giving my students this opportunity. I'd like to thank my fellow teachers in both the UK and Japan for their support of the students. And then finally, to the most important people, the students. What excellent presentations. What you've managed to accomplish in such a short space of time is nothing short of spectacular. Lots and lots of questions this year. Very, very high quality questions, both asked and answered. So well done for that. I think you've done Eric proud on that side of things. Not only have you had to contend with getting your heads around the research projects, you've also had to manage the time difference and the language barrier. And perhaps the most difficult thing is having to sit still for such a long period of time and focus on hours and hours spent on Zoom. That is a very difficult thing to do, so well done. So congratulations to everybody involved. Thank you very much, and arigatou gozaimasu.
Thank you very much. And of course, this is a very important workshop for teachers, because there's an opportunity to share between the two nations in education. And an important part of the workshop, which isn't mentioned in this presentation, is the Teachers Forum, which we ran on Tuesday, and which was very productive indeed. And the talks, we had talks from 4 teachers, 2 from Britain and 2 from Japan, and discussed what they had to say. And they, apart from one, they were all focused very much on the impact of COVID and how people are approaching it. Perhaps they all were dealing with COVID one way or another. So thank teachers for what's going on. And now we're moving in a moment to Fukushima High School. And just to say that we got involved in Fukushima High School and the area of Tohoku following the tsunami now sort of 10 years ago. And we've maintained that link ever since. And we're really grateful to have formed that link with that part of Japan. So Kaho Hashimoto, Fukushima High School, would you like to say something?
Hello everyone, I'm Kaho Hashimoto, and yeah, I'm a student of Fukushima High School. Now that the WITS activities are about to end, and I'm really glad I attended this workshop. It is full of fulfillment, and it's sad to be leaving everyone. I just regret not being able to actually meet the members in the UK. Even so, now that SNS is developing, I was able to connect via the internet. The most satisfying feeling was the night activities. I also proceeded with my activities while my coworkers on the British side were conducting research. We talked and shared a lot of things and provided a lot of support for me. Communication is very important for Group 5. In order to share the research content and convey it to other coworkers, it is essential to have an understanding of each other. I am only grateful to my coworkers who corrected my poor English. Also, researching nuclear energy was very interesting for me because I was born in Fukushima. I really enjoyed the conversation I had with my friends in my group outside of this work hour. I am very interested in British culture. I definitely want to visit there someday. It was inspiring to know the future dreams of my friends, and what I am interested in now is. I also want to broaden my horizons. I want to know more about science and the world of the future. 1週間の活動が終わろうとしている今、私はこのワークショップに参加してよかったと心から思います。充実感でいっぱいです。メンバーたちと実際に顔を合わせられなかったこと、それは私の心残りです。それでも SNS が発達している今だからこそ、ネットを介してつながることができました。最も充足感を得られたのは夜間の活動でした。イギリス側の仲間たちが研究を進めている時間に、私も自分の活動を進めました。わからないことを話し合い、語彙力が足りない私のためにたくさんサポートをしてくれました。私が活動したグループ5は、コミュニケーションが大変重要です。研究した内容を共有し合い、それを他の仲間たちに伝えるために、仲間内での共通理解が不可欠です。拙い英語をさらに磨いてくれた仲間たちには感謝しかありません。また、原子力グループへのインタビューをまとめる作業は、福島で生まれた私にとっても、とても興味深く、ポッドキャスト作成への意欲が増長しました。余談ですが、この作業時間外に仲間たちと交わした会話も心から楽しかったです。私は今、イギリスの文化に大きな興味を抱いています。いつか必ず訪れたいです。仲間たちの将来の夢や、私が今夢中になっていることを知ることができて刺激になりました。 私ももっともっと広い世界を、科学の世界を、そして未来の世界を知りたいです。Finally, I would like to thank my Group 5 members for working together. And my group members, Isaac and Maddie, thank you for your support. I would like to thank the teachers who gave me this wonderful opportunity, the teachers who gave me lectures, the facilitators, and so on. Thank you very much.
Okay, well, thank you very, very much, Kaho. A very, very impressive little presentation. Could I now move on to Mr. Ryota Endo from Fukushima High School, who teaches at Fukushima High School and has been involved with us for some time.
Okay, thank you, Eric. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm very honored to be here with you today. My name is Ryota Endo. I'm the English teacher in Fukushima High School. Okay, first of all, on behalf of Japanese group, I'd like to express my thanks to all of you. Student, you did a very good job. Well done. Also, I'd like to extend special thanks to the professors, facilitators, Dr. Albon. Thank you for your hard work. Dr. Toshio Nomura, we have several meetings in advance. And Miss Mary Grace Browning, she got up 4:30 every day. Thank you for your hard work. So from now on, let me talk about how I feel on this workshop from my point of view. Asking you a question. Student, please use the chat to answer the question. Is that okay? Let me share the screen. Okay, first question. How long does it take from Japan to the UK by plane? How long does it take from Japan to the UK by plane? I give you a hint. In my case, 2 years ago, I used the Qatar airline. So I went to the Qatar to transit airplane. So next, I went to the Heathrow Airport from Qatar. So how long did I take to the UK? I give you an answer. From Narita Airport to Qatar, it took me 10 hours. And from Qatar to Heathrow Airport, it took me 8 hours. So in total, it took me 18 hours to go to the UK. So I had a lot of time in the airplane. I had nothing to do. So I watched the movie, Killing the Time. This is one of the movie I watched. It's called the Oku Otoko in Japanese. In English, maybe $1 Million Man, I guess. So it's a story about a man who won the lottery. He got tons of money in the lottery. But in the end, he knew there is something you can't buy. So what's that? Maybe students know. Through this workshop, you made friends, experienced something new, learned a lot. These friendships, experience, and knowledge are the things you can't buy. This is the first thing I want to tell you. Okay, next question. Who made Mac? Who made iPhone? Yes, of course, Steve Jobs. So one more question. What are the famous words he said at the graduation? Actually, at the graduation ceremony in Stanford University. So this is a picture. So what are the famous words he said at the graduation ceremony in Stanford University? Stay healthy? No. Please say to Mary Grace. The answer is stay hungry, stay foolish. These words are very famous, but I'd like to tell you a little bit more about his speech. He said these words at the end of the speech. Because that, he said, like this. You can't connect the dot looking forward. 将来を見据えて出来事と出来事を結びつけることはできません。Once again, you can't connect the dot looking forward. You can only connect the dot looking backwards. 後で振り返ってみたときしか点と点を結びつけることはできないのです。So nobody knows what's going to happen in the future. Nobody knows this workshop has an effect on your future. But I strongly hope this moment, this workshop, will connect in your future. So you have to trust the dot will somehow connect in your future. This is my last slide. Don't be afraid of making mistakes. Keep asking questions. Stay hungry. Stay foolish. That's all for my speech. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Endo. I just had a phone call from Alec Boxenberg, who's on the screen, and he's sent his profound apologies that his system doesn't work. He said, as always is the case with technology, it worked yesterday, and but he is extremely apologetic. But he made the point that he was immensely impressed with the quality of the presentations and the work that's been done in such a short time, with the limitation of not being together physically. He also said it emphasizes the fact that science and engineering are now global. Global cultures have global influence and a global language, and that the kinds of interactions we were having today would not have been possible sort of 10 or 20 years ago. So we're very sorry you couldn't make it, Alec, but I hope I've said something of what you were going to say. I think it's now time really for me to wind up the session. Obviously, we've had a fantastic week. Thinking back to Monday morning, it seems the time seems to whiz by. In some other ways, it seems to be a long time ago. But now is the end of this workshop. But it's not really an end, it's really a beginning, particularly for students, because this is a beginning of, perhaps, I hope, we've given you a new kind of perspective, a little bit of a new perspective on things. And it's a beginning of a next phase as you move into university or wherever you're going, of the next phase of your life. And we do wish you every success in your careers, and please do keep in touch. And if there are any ways we can help, or if there are any ways you might like to get involved again, sort of as facilitators or something, in the future, we'll be very pleased to talk to you about it. So this is the end of our workshop. It has whizzed past, and even with the distance of physical presence and with the problem of language, we've pretty well got to know each other. Not as well as we would if we were together, but we've got to know each other quite well. And hopefully next year, in July 2022, we will be having a workshop in Tohoku University and a workshop in Cambridge University. That's our plan, provided we can raise monies to make that possible, and so on. But let's take it from there. I know there's lots of thanks being given. We thank, obviously, the students who've done so well. we've worked in teams. We thank the facilitators who've been absolutely fantastic, and the teaching assistants who've been fantastic in helping the groups to work together. We really do thank the scientists who've given up their time and have interacting so well with the students. And I'd like particularly to thank Professor Toshio Nomura, Mary Grace Browning, and Ian Price, who have made the technology of this thing work. And it's not at all simple. And they've put a lot of effort into it. And we do thank them very much indeed. Can we give them a little clap? Now, I'd just like to end over, our aim when we're doing these things is that the groups are not competing with each other. The students are not competing with each other. The students are free to think and have ideas and ask questions which sometimes they might think are silly, but they're never silly. And they work hard with their presentations. That's the challenge, not with each other, but with the presentation. And everyone gets a certificate, which when we're in Cambridge and when we're in Japan, we have a nice dinner when that happens, and the certificates are distributed, and they're for everybody all the students who took part. And another thing I would say is, of course, the presentations we've just seen will be online for people to go back to. That's right, isn't it, Toshio? Is Toshio there? They will be online.
I can say they'll be online, yes. Yes.
Yeah. And we can send the information about that. But I'd like to hand over now to Mary Grace. And you see on the screen Ian Price, who's been backing her up throughout in the technology. So over to you about certificates.
Every student will receive one of these certificates, and in true university style, the person who comes at the head of the alphabet gets their certificate read in full. So Clifton Scientific Trust 2021 UK-Japan Young Scientist Workshop. UK-Japan Young Scientists Working Together. Alexander Aldridge, Abbeygate Sixth Form College, in recognition of his valued contribution to the 2021 UK-Japan Young Scientists Online Workshop, 19th to 23rd July 2021. Signed by Dr. Eric Alban, Clifton Scientific Trust. The 2021 UK-Japan Young Scientists Workshop was devised and organised by the Clifton Scientific Trust in association with Fukushima High School and the Kyoto University of Education attached Senior High School, with generous financial support and support in kind from the Great Britain Sasakawa Foundation, Mitsubishi Electric Europe, the Japan Women's Association in Great Britain, Kyoto University of Education, and Barclays Bank.
Okay.
Congratulations to all the students. Their teachers know where to find these. They are in the documents in room 0. And if by any chance there are still 1 or 2 spelling mistakes, we can very quickly correct them before you print them off. Do just drop me a line and I'll alter it for you.
Thank you, Mary Grace. Is there anything else you want to say? That's it. These documents can be collected online. And again, thanks to everybody for making this a wonderful new experiment in running the workshops. And it's been very successful. We're so pleased that you, the students, have gained so much. So here, we have to say goodbye for now. But as I said just now, this is not the end. It is a beginning. So goodbye for now.